Hey everyone, I'm Carlos and welcome to a new book discussion of productbookclub.com. Every month we discuss online a book about product management together with the author and other product colleagues. If you want to find the recordings from our previous discussions and also join us and participate on the upcoming ones, go to productbookclub.com. To find out how to support the book club and help us keep it running without any ads, check the links in the description. Let's start. Welcome everyone to the Product Book Club. My name is Carlos, and today we're going to discuss the book inspired by Marty Cagan, and we're very excited to have Marty with us today. So thank you very much for your time. Marty is going to stay with us for around an hour, right? And it's as I've mentioned on the emails. Please, everyone, feel free to ask questions. And I would like this to be more of a discussion, right, rather than us just bombarding Marty with questions. And if you're asking the question, of course, please mention your name, from where you're calling, so we know with whom we're speaking. If you're not speaking, then please mute your mic as well, so we can avoid some external noises. And I assume everyone has read the book, right? So maybe knows a bit about Marty. But Marty, maybe we can start also with a quick intro from you.
Okay, well, if you did read the book there, you've probably heard quite a bit about me. But I've been doing product for my whole career, and started as an engineer, and then got interested in learning more about the product side, and have been doing both really. I focus really on product teams is my interest, product management, product design, and engineers. But I also talk probably more about product management than any of the others because there aren't a lot of people that talk about that. Most people want to talk about engineering or design. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, which is sort of like the first thing I wanted to mention. I finished reading the second edition, and I think indeed you also mentioned it compared to the first one. It's like a more focus on the product manager rather than the product team as a whole, right? Why do you think there is not that many books or resources that talk about the role in itself, right? Because we have discussed books before, and indeed it's related to product management, let's say, or to the teams, but that only talk about the role specifically. Indeed, I don't see that many.
Yeah, it gets pretty complicated, but I think the fundamental issue is because there are really three different ways of doing product out there. And the way you do design and engineering is not that different. That's pretty much the same. But the way you do product management is very different based on those three kinds of teams and three styles of doing product. And because of that, it's really confused out there. There's a lot of very conflicting messages. So a lot of people get very confused as like, well, this person said one thing and another person said another thing, and it makes absolutely no sense. And what I think is really going on is they're describing a different one of those three. And I mean, to make matters worse, the best teams, in my opinion, are the least common as well. They're harder to do. So most of the people that talk about product are really talking about the more common, less impressive teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And I also, when reading the book, indeed, it also says, right, this is aimed at product managers. But then reading, I think it's also, or I've also recommended it to engineers or developers, because I think to a certain degree, it also helps then hold us accountable, right? Or to know what to expect also from the role, which I think is a good way also then for us to put the expectations high, I think, on what we should be doing. No?
Sure.
Yeah. And I also saw that the main difference, or well, a difference from the first edition to the other one was there is a whole new section on the culture, right? Because I think on the first edition is process, product, people. On the second one, I saw that indeed there was a whole new section on culture. Why did you see it having to add on the second edition? Was it maybe you saw more like a need for that culture, or it was becoming more critical?
Well, culture has always been important for sure. The biggest section that was new in the second edition, I mean, every page was new. It was a whole new iteration of the book. But the biggest section that was new was product at scale, talking about how do you deal with product with large organizations. And in fact, there's a new book I have coming out that really turns that whole topic of product and scale into a full book, because that really is a complicated topic. Culture is a part of that.
Yeah. How do you see with culture, like with, do you think then it should be more aimed maybe at like that top level, or something that, from the product teams can be more influenced, like, down to top? Or
yeah, I mean, culture, it's really the product teams don't really set the culture. The leaders of the company set the culture, especially the founders. If you're interested in culture, the best book I've seen on that is Ben Horowitz's new book, and I would strongly recommend it. Yeah, what you are is, or what you do is who you are is what you do. It's got some name I'm always confusing, but it's extremely. I can share the link here if you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question also related to the culture. So so my name is Timur. I'm a front-end developer in Booking.com. So Marty, in your book, you give a lot of lists or checklists of how things should work, and or list of ideas, like what's the ideal things to have. And while reading this, I was missing this part of what are the actual things that might bring company to the state, to this ideal state, and what are the things that might bring and foster the culture and the right culture. And second question is a follow-up, is basically, is it possible to do it bottom-up solution? Not only because in Booking.com we have a lot of developers and a lot of levels of management, so it's much harder to sell the idea to the leaders rather than it's easier to do it locally, I would say. So what's your advice about fostering the right culture?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I just actually shared two links. One was the link to Ben's book, but the other one was to your question, Timur. How do you, the way we usually frame that is, how do you transform an organization? How do you move to become a great organization? And it's worth noting, like, one of my favorite startups from many years ago was in Amsterdam called Booking.com. I mean, the original Booking.com. As you know, they were acquired and then they sort of rebranded the parent company. The reason the parent company wanted to do that, of course, is because the real Booking.com did an amazingly good job. And they were an extremely good startup with just, they were doing product the way I think you should do product. And I had a chance to work with some of those people, and it was wonderful to see them disrupt their space. Today, I don't know, we're 15 years later, something like that. I was trying to remember when I was first in Amsterdam with Booking. But, you know, when companies get big and they get acquired, they often lose what made them great. It happens all the time. I've written about that. It's really unfortunate. And that usually happens when the founders leave and, you know, the big corporate types take over and try to, you know, it just goes south. And so there are companies that have had to discover that again. Microsoft did that. They've just been turning around. It's been great to see. Disney did that with Pixar. Apple, of course, did that. It's not impossible to do it, but it's hard. But you had asked also, how do you change if can you do it from the bottom up? And I don't want to mislead you. I only know of one case in my entire career where I've seen that work. It's very, very hard to change from the bottom up. And in that company, which was actually the BBC in London, the reason they could do it was because their most senior leadership is a political appointee. They're not even a regular CEO. They're a political appointee. And they basically don't know much about what's going on. And as long as it's good, they're happy with it. So it was a very unusual culture, and I think that was necessary to pull that off. It is very hard for you to change meaningfully from the team level. You can certainly adopt better techniques. You can certainly become a better skilled team, but it's very hard to change the culture and to really transform.
Yeah. Thanks for the answer.
Marty, I have a question. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, this is Ankur. I'm right now in the US. I am a senior product manager with Wayfair. I've read your book long ago, Marty, and I have followed a lot of your blogs. What I really love about what you do and what you've been doing is you're not hesitant to talk about the hard things. And the hard things being that, preaching product management is one thing and taking it into organizations and organizations at scale is another battle, like you were just talking about. And through your learnings and through your pitching these things out in the organizations, you are advancing product management. So it is great to see. What the question I have for you is, where do you see this going in another 5 years, 10 years from here? Will we be able to win this battle? The battle being, doing product management right. That's my question. What's your success criteria in 5 to 10 years from now?
That's a hard question, and honestly, it depends on the day. Lately, I feel like we're losing that war. If you look at I mentioned at the beginning that there were 3 ways people do product, and I talk about product teams, real product teams working, and all the best companies I know, this is how they work. But unfortunately, there are a lot of other kinds of companies out there. If you go to most big banks, for example, they have huge numbers of developers, but they have lots of people called product managers, but they're not doing any kind of product that you would recognize. It's they're usually running this process called SAFe. Do you know what SAFe is? It stands for Scaled Agile Framework, and it's not agile in any sense. That is just marketing. And when you look at that and you see how that grows because so many clueless leaders think that's a good thing, it's easy to lose hope that companies will ever be able to do good work anymore. And honestly, if your company is using a process like that, I literally don't know how you can do any modern product that way. You really have to go to a company that at least has what we call feature teams.
So I'll shed some light in that moment of despair. The company was LexisNexis. They were doing SAFe when I joined the company. And after a workshop by SVPG came in, did a workshop, and everybody was on board. The leadership was on board. We touched on this point earlier that everybody needs to speak the language. It's like teaching French, right? If a product manager believes in something, knows his role, they're doing okay, but it requires so many different players to be speaking that language, understanding that game. So your workshops are helping a lot out there.
Yeah, but realize we are very tiny, and there are thousands and thousands of companies that we never see. And so it's not about us. It's really just about, I think, the industry. And, the industry forces, there's a lot of people that want to go back to old waterfall ways of working. And I understand why they do. They're not going to get any innovation. I've never seen any innovation come out of that way of working, but I understand why they like it. And so anyway, it's hard to say. In 5 or 10 years, the only companies that may be doing good product work are companies like Amazon and Google and Netflix. It's very possible. On the other hand, what I hope, of course, is that many more companies start adopting those practices. There's no reason that other companies can't do that as well. So on my more optimistic days, at the very least, we should be able to convince companies that have feature teams to consider real product teams. So in other words, let their product managers be real product managers. At the least, we should be able to get that done.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Marty, it's Howard Chalmers. You know, I read the first edition back before you came to Blackbaud and consulted with us. I guess that was 10 years ago now. And the biggest challenge that I saw then was sort of how to convince the powers that be that half of our ideas weren't going to work, but they still needed to continue to invest even though we were failing. So fast forward 10, 11 years, whatever it's been since then. And the biggest challenge is convincing the powers that be that half of our ideas aren't going to work and they need to continue to invest. It's, you know, different powers that be, but it seems like the same investment challenge. I've been most of the time in enterprise software, and it feels a lot like enterprise software is waterfall at its core. And sometimes the teams are trying to do something scrummy. So you've got this waterfall process with this, you know, trying to be agile back end, and it, you know, a little bit about what Timur was asking about, you know, sort of bottom up. You know, I think your comment about how hard it is to change that culture, especially on the enterprise side, is sort of spot on. And I just wondered if, you know, if you've seen anything different, or if, you know, I guess it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but it seems to continue to be a challenge, and it is a little discouraging, although there are pockets of people, like I mentioned you in an interview the other day, and they're like, oh yeah, I read Marty's book and it changed the way I think. And this was an engineering guy. It changed everything I thought about. I'm like, yes, I think I want to come work with you because I think we could do something really cool together. But one thing I did notice in the book, and I want to kind of bring it back around to that, is you went from a 10-question opportunity assessment in the first edition to a 4-question opportunity assessment in the second edition. And I was wondering if you've gotten a whole lot of feedback on that. Is it simpler, easier to use? Are you seeing more adoption of that? Or, you know, I've got a couple other questions that are kind of my go-tos that I add on to the 4. But what have you seen as sort of that evolution over the last decade or so?
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. You know, originally there was this 10-question opportunity assessment, but if you looked on the in that description, it said, by the way, this is meant to be tailored for every company, you know, whatever the interesting things are. And a lot of companies did that. I did that with different companies too. We all tailored it. And what I realized over the years was there were really just 4 questions that were critical. Everybody had to answer. And then the other ones were more dependent on the company. And so it's one of those things, I think, that's less is more. If you can get people to focus on those 4 all the time, then that's better progress. And then they can add other ones if they want to, you know, consider other things. It's not a problem, but to make sure that they don't lose the 4 in the bigger set. And there was another reason I did that too, which is, you know, you're always trying to encourage people to keep things in perspective. And an opportunity assessment is supposed to be a 10-minute thing. It is not supposed to be a big deal. And a lot of product people, I mean, I literally saw product managers saying, my job is to write opportunity assessments. And I'm thinking like, wow, what a great job. I'd only have to work about 30 minutes a week and I could just hang out at the beach. I'm like, no, that's not your job. You know, that is such a little administrative part. So, you know, I think by putting it down to critical 4 questions, which is, you know, pretty much aligned to OKRs, it puts it, I think, a little more in perspective. That's all.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Do you mind? I wanted to Howard's earlier part of his question or statement. I didn't address, and I meant to, but he sort of made the assumption that enterprise software pretty much inevitably turns into crap. He didn't say that, by the way, but that's what the implication.
That's definitely what I meant. That is absolutely what I meant.
Yeah, but that's the implication, and it's it's really not about enterprise software at all. And I know personally great enterprise software companies now working as good as the best companies in the world. It's not about that, but it's disproportionately represented in enterprise, because the root of this is not really so much that, oh, well, they don't realize that half their ideas don't work out. The root of it is, where do these ideas even come from? If they come from the leaders or the stakeholders, which is really what happens in so many of those organizations, then that's really the root of the issue. They are all attached to their favorite ideas, and it's just about delivering those ideas. And they get very frustrated, eventually they don't work, but they don't really care. They think they are the ones that are supposed to do that, as opposed to empowering product teams to go solve problems. And that's really the difference between the really good companies. Really, that's the difference between empowered product teams and feature teams. In feature teams, you have these executives or stakeholders that one way or another are passing along a bunch of features. And a lot of times in enterprise software, it's prospective customers and sales that are passing along features. So that's more of the issue, and not so much the the nature of product ideas. I interrupted somebody.
No,
yeah,
fine.
Go ahead.
My question's kind of linked to it. I'm Emily. I'm a product manager at Katowiki, and what I spend a lot of my time with is actually taking a feature list and then trying to make people understand that we're looking at the problem and not that they already found the solution. So I really like the idea in the book about the outcome-based roadmaps that you describe, but do you have some tips on how to get that going, or how should that kind of roadmap look like then? Because yeah, that's kind of could save me some time explaining to my stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I'd really like to do, what you want to do. The outcome-based roadmap is meant to be a temporary situation. It's meant to just change the behaviors so that they stop just giving you these features to build, because you're describing a feature team where the product team is trying to reverse engineer what the problem to solve really is. And you can't really blame the stakeholders for asking for features. That's just sort of normal. But what we want to do is try to redefine the relationship so that the way I really describe it in my new book, I describe it as, you need to move from a subservient model where you think where the company thinks your team is there to build what they need, to a collaborative model where you are there to build solutions for your customers, but in ways that work for your stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so that's a very different relationship. If you can redefine the relationship, then the whole outcome-based roadmap becomes really a non-issue. So you can do an outcome-based roadmap. They're easy to do. They're just a transition tool. They're meant to kind of rephrase the dialogue.
Yeah.
But if you find yourself doing the same thing a year from now, you won't have done anything. You won't have accomplished anything.
No, exactly. But I like.
By the way, Emily, other than irritate your stakeholders because you're always telling them, what problem are you trying to solve? That they're like, get lost. Just build this feature.
Well, what I've tried now is actually have a brainstorm with them and include them in the entire process. So that maybe goes hand in hand with that collaborative solution you're talking about.
Yeah, that's definitely better to kind of bring them closer there. But the main thing you need to do is get that focus over to the real customers. And, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Just to add to that, sorry, Sam here, product manager from Booking.com. How do you convince people to trust you to try that once? once you've done it once, I assume there's a bit of a cycle, right? It works.
Yeah, no, it's fair question, and this is sort of what starts that transformation process that Timur had asked before. How do you kind of get a chance to give this a try? There's different things that can motivate this change. The most common is that it's just they're frustrated it's not working well. They feel like they've been spending all this money and getting so little. So somebody comes and says, hey, what if we try something else? That often works. Sometimes what it takes is Amazon going into your space. And then all of a sudden, the senior leaders start getting very scared. That happens a remarkable amount. And because they know Amazon is really good. If they decide to go after travel booking, then that would be bad news for booking.com, for example, because they know what they're doing. So that happens. Sometimes what happens also is the board of directors replaces the CEO because the board doesn't believe the CEO understands technology. We've all seen that happen in the industry. Unfortunately, when that happens, it's usually too late, but it does happen. That's what happened at Barnes & Noble, for example. They did realize Amazon was coming after them. And the board says, we need a leader that can do this. And they did remarkable things, but it was already too late. So they needed more time.
Hi, Marty and everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Gabriel, also product manager for Booking, but in the security department. I also read your book, huge fan. But I noticed that in the book, you don't extend too much for the platform kind of product manager, right? The ones that are not delivering a product for the end user, but that you leverage other teams to achieve goals, right? And my question is regarding the outcome-based roadmap. And you talk about how to map outcomes to business impact, right? So in this case, for example, in my case in security, we have this impact through other teams, enabling other teams. So building this kind of roadmap gets even more complicated because you depend on other teams measuring their outcome, their metrics to showcase the outcome. Do you have any suggestion on how to manage these kind of things?
Well, it's a really common problem because literally a platform team is there to enable the other teams. And so it is true that we still want to measure by outcomes. In other words, security is a good example. And, you are there providing real service, right? Important service that might be around protecting assets. It might be around authentication. It could be around whatever. But and you should have that. However, it's also true that you're not doing it alone. You're usually doing it in partnership with other product teams. So I've always wondered if I should write more about platform teams. I love platform teams myself. I work disproportionately on platform. But the other thing is it's, first of all, it's not 90% of product is really the same, platform versus experience team. In the new book, I do talk more about team topology and talk more about the power of platform teams, but it's more just making the argument that platform teams are a good thing to do. They're not really talking so much about the nature of what's different, although I do address questions like OKRs are more difficult for platform teams for this same reason.
Definitely.
So I have written some. If you Google platform product manager, you'll find some, but there isn't that much that has been published on it. Most people say the same thing. It's mostly the same, but it's more technical, obviously, right? And very often and your customers, your direct customers are the developers on the other teams. So you have to factor that in, obviously. But, the good news is more and more good product companies are investing more and more into the platforms, even purely internal platforms. So I like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, just that the developers are your customers just becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of feature requests, because now they know what they want and then try to give you the solution. So it's very complicated.
Normal. Exactly right. It is harder. And by the way, it's not an accident that at places like Google and Facebook, they put their best engineers on the platform because of that.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I wanted also to maybe also to echo, like, examples of the outcome based roadmap, and that I also noticed that the book, I find it very nice to to reference and then to read, like from time to time again, just to sort of as a checklist of things that I should be doing as a product manager, right? But then there are some good examples of some of the product managers at I think Adobe, right, and a few others. But then I sometimes miss, like, exactly, right? Like, okay, I need to do an outcome base, and this is exactly how it should be, or this is a clear example, so that then, okay, now I can adapt it to my company. And I know that there are some examples on the SBPG website as well, right? But not for like everything that is mentioned on the book. Is that sort of like a bit maybe on purpose, because maybe it's maybe not one formula for everyone, but or what do you think about that?
It's a really common question. People want, and by the way, like, for example, I got lots of requests for examples on product vision. And so I just said, fine. And I put lots of examples, more examples of product vision. Just about a month ago, I put this out there. And you know what? I got a bunch more questions saying, oh, I can't see an example exactly of what I need. And I realized that what people are doing is they don't want to think through it. It really does. You will never find exactly the example you're looking for. And I would much rather you focus the energy on going deep, really thinking about it deeply. The examples only do so much. Bottom line, at a certain point, you're going to have to go and solve it, whatever it is. Now, I do think everybody should have a good manager that can help you when you need it for your particular situation. But it's just human nature. The worst example of this is actually product strategy. Everybody wants to, like, step 1, 2, 3 for product strategy. And I'm always explaining that is not how product strategy works. You're going to have to do some real work to get a good product strategy. It's not a formula. And a lot of people really struggle with that. They want that formula.
Yeah, so going back, I have another comment, maybe because I was reading the chat, and really interested that many people are talking about this same problem of platform product manager or platform product. One of the challenges we have had by linking outcomes to business objectives was to understand how our product impacts the other team metrics, right? And sometimes it's very difficult to make them measure something, because sometimes the other teams doesn't have the necessary metrics to follow up. So we started taking a look more inside, and this is our current approach, trying to achieve this. Create a set of metrics internally that we can use as a maturity model of the product, to link on how this is impacting the other teams and the business metric in the end, so we can focus on the product maturity ourselves. So we can say, now link the outcome-based roadmap to our product maturity, because we know how it links to the business objectives. So a little bit of an abstraction there.
Yeah, be careful. First of all, don't use that word maturity. That is a terrible word, means something very different. That's not what you're talking about. I don't know exactly. I would love to hear what's an example. But most of the time when people say what you just said, what they're really describing are activities. They're saying, like, we think if we can do 10 iterations a week, then we're good and we're doing our part. That's activity. That is vanity.
No.
So if you mean, there is this discussion, this sort of a little nuanced in the OKR world, but in terms of key results, you know, they have to be business results or results, real results, not output. So they need to be outcome. But there is business outcome, like we've doubled our revenue, and there is product outcome, like we had a 25% increase in signups. That's so, and it's okay if we believe that product outcomes are a proxy for business outcomes. That's okay. If that's what you mean, then that's fine. But you would never use the term maturity for that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it was more about insecurity. For example, we don't talk much about revenue. We talk about risk, right?
Yeah.
And there is a framework that we use to measure risk. So if we know how our product impacts this framework, this score, right, then we can understand how different metrics that we can impact in our product will end up impacting the business metric. So it's a little bit complicated, but
no, that's reasonable. I've heard other risk teams, for example, focus on false negatives and false positives, and they know that if they can reduce those, that is not directly revenue, but that will translate to revenue. That's an example of product outcomes versus business outcomes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I wanted to mention also, like, there is one quote that I also share from the book, and there was sort of like a debate that started going on that I thought it would be interesting also to maybe if you can expand more on that, Marty, and then also hear from the others what they think. That it says, when a product succeeds, it's because everyone on the team did what they needed to do, but when a product fails, it's the product manager's fault. And how do you see that playing, for example, also when indeed it's, I don't know, stakeholders just sending you features to do, right?
Well, then that's a feature team. That's not a product manager. For that, you know, in a feature team, you would never say what I said.
Yeah.
In a feature team, the truth is, in a feature team, you don't even need a product manager. You need a project manager. And you can't hold a project manager accountable that way. But the point of an empowered product team is that you can hold a product manager really accountable for the results. And that's where that quote comes from. So really, all of my writing is only meant to apply to product teams, not to feature teams, and certainly not to delivery teams, like with processes like SAFe and less.
Yeah. But then, for example, on the book, it says, right, you also mentioned, I want to clarify what I mean by product. And then I think you give the example of if it's an e-commerce, then the product is basically everything except what is actually being sold, right?
Right.
But it's also now common, right, that on an e-commerce business, there will be one product team, or well, one team with, in theory, a product manager that is only in charge of, I don't know, the shopping cart, and then another one in charge of the checkout, for example, right? Would then, even though they have the freedom and the autonomy, would then they be a feature team, or?
No. I mean, these are different things. So if you want to talk a kind of product as e-commerce, that's say, okay, e-commerce is a kind of product. We still have to break up our product teams different ways. We can break them up many different ways. You described one way that some kinds of companies break it up, which is by step in a journey, like shopping, paying, shipping. That's fine. That's one way. There's other ways to break it up too. Now you're just talking about the scope of a product team, what that product team is responsible for. No matter what the scope of a product team, you can still have business outcomes, or you can give them features to build. So no matter what, they can still be as feature teams or product teams.
Okay, I understand. Get it.
Do you just to add to that, do you not run the risk of splitting the scope of a product team to be such a small piece of scope that it becomes not valuable for it to be a business outcome?
Well, not so much not valuable, but don't get me wrong. I don't like those skinny little teams you're describing. I like teams to have end-to-end responsibility. This is now, we've moved into a different topic. It's called team topology. That's what this is referring to, is how do you structure your teams? Do you remember before when I was telling Gabrielle how much I like platform teams? Well, yeah. I didn't say this, but the reason I'm such a big fan of platform teams is it lets us give experienced teams more end-to-end responsibility, because it raises the level of abstraction so that they can have a much broader scope of responsibility. In fact, many experienced teams they can be responsible for a full iPhone native app, end-to-end, the whole thing. Now that's doable because it's not deep, it's shallow, but it's broad. So this gets a little complicated, but that's why we love platforms. They let us give much more control and autonomy to the experienced product teams. So Sam, you're right. I don't like those tiny little teams. You know, what you hear is people say, you know, we're just one little cog in a giant wheel. We can't do anything ourselves. Everything we need to do, even a dumb little feature, requires all kinds of teams to work with us. That's not very empowering at all. It's also very slow, right? Because there's so many dependencies. So I'm not advocating that. I'm advocating, you know, moving away from that. But you can still have business outcomes. The other piece of the puzzle, though, no matter what you do, even if you have a very tiny responsibility, you can still figure out which team is making positive versus negative impact with an A/B test. So A/B test will let us isolate out that contribution.
Yeah. I also wanted, like, you know, on the book there is a lot of pages dedicated to product discovery, which of course is very important. But then it also made me think, do you think there are not that many then techniques or frameworks or more dedicated into product delivery in itself?
Well, there's many books, many books on product delivery. If you think about it, Scrum is a product delivery process. Kanban is a product delivery process. There are thousands of books, or probably my favorite product delivery techniques are continuous deployment, continuous delivery. There are already plenty of books on delivery. That's the world of engineers are responsible for that. There's very few books on discovery. And so that's what Inspired is trying to speak to.
Yeah. What would you say is the main responsibility of the product manager in delivery, right? Because of course with product discovery you're going to end up like, okay, you know what should be built, right? Why? Of course, engineer is going to decide how you do it, but then what would you say is the main responsibility or role of the product manager on the delivery part?
Well, there's a couple, and I want to be clear. Product teams do discovery and delivery every day. That's what they do every day.
Yeah.
The product manager and designer are focused almost all on discovery work, and the engineers almost all on delivery work, but they're helping each other, and they are responsible to help each other. So the main ways product managers help the engineers on delivery is, number one, when you actually coding and QAing things, you will find other situations and you need answers for. So you need to be available to answer that. And second is, there are sometimes, this is less common with continuous delivery, but there are sometimes situations where there are release management concerns, like should this be made visible to this kind of user, or should we wait until something has happened? That obviously is product manager needs to participate in that.
Okay.
The other person obviously that plays a big role in this question is product marketing.
Yeah. Cool. So someone wants to make a question, or?
I have another one if nobody else has a question. I already asked, but
go for it, yeah.
I was very curious about that principal product manager role you also described, because we recently introduced this in our company, but as I read it in your book, it's a completely different function. So I was curious on your vision on this, and I was really excited to read it, that it's actually something else.
Well, I'd be curious to hear what you have. I've never actually seen much variation on it around the world, but so I'd be curious how you're using it. But normally, it's an individual contributor, product manager at the top of the individual contributor ladder. That's all. So it's like a senior product manager, but even better. And I want to be clear, it's a very prestigious role. So if a company has 100 product managers, they might have 1 or 2 principal product managers. It's very prestigious.
Okay, that's interesting to know.
At good companies like a Google, it's equivalent to a director or a VP even in compensation.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen that done really poorly, where it's just another. It's based on seniority. It's based on tenure with the company, especially, I mentioned earlier, been in a lot of enterprise software companies. And it's someone who they think probably ought to be a manager, but maybe doesn't have management skills. And not like Marty said, that prestige. I look for someone, if I'm hiring a principal product manager, it's the person who embodies everything I want to see in product discovery and delivery and can sort of lead efforts from a product management perspective, but really has to focus on being that unbelievable individual contributor.
Yeah, that's what it's for. Anyway, and there is this notion of dual career ladders where you can either be a manager, people manager, or you can be an individual contributor. And the industry learned a long, long time ago that it's a really bad idea to try to convince somebody to try to basically make it so that if they want more money, they have to go into management. That's a really bad idea. You want to make it so they go into management for the right reasons. And so the reason we have principal engineers, principal designers, principal product managers is so that somebody can stay as an individual contributor, but just getting more and more accomplished, like Howard was saying. So if your company's using that for some other definition, then it's not a big deal because there's so few of them, but whenever you retitle something, you make it hard for people career-wise to either come to you or move on in the future to another company and leverage what they've done. So,
yeah, that's interesting. Thanks.
Sure.
Marty, just to go a little bit deeper onto that question, if you have a minute. Again, the role of principal PM versus a principal engineer. Like engineering is established. People in the engineering world would see principal engineer as somebody who's deep into technology. Other teams consult with that person to figure out the architectures, kind of thing.
But it's not a manager, right? It's not a people manager.
Yeah, not a manager.
Same with principal product manager and same with principal designer. Just like you said, just substitute engineering or product for engineering. Design or product.
So let's say if a principal PM were managing the scope of a project or a piece of product, what would be the relationship between him or her and the other senior PMs or PMs working on the same scope?
Well, we're talking one product team. This is one product team. Product team has a product manager, could be whatever level. They have a designer, could be whatever level, and it has at least 2 engineers, could be whatever level. So they're all, so for example, let's say you had a principal product manager because this was a very hard and important product. So the principal product manager is a rock star, excellent. And then you have a designer working with that person. It doesn't have to be a principal designer. It would be very rare, but it's got a designer of whatever level, and it's got some engineers at whatever level.
I see. Okay. So it's just the scope and the importance and the how hard the problem is, got nothing to do with the size of the team or
right.
That's right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, also besides the complexity of the problem, maybe as well the knowledge in the domain, right? It can affect, so for example, a product manager in security products, if he is very knowledgeable of the security domain, also can...
Yeah, you would expect at every level, product manager, senior product manager, at every level, you would expect them to be much more knowledgeable about the domain. In this case, is just one of the dimensions.
Okay.
Yeah. I also wanted to mention, Marty, you also, not only on the book, I think also on a lot of the blogs, right? You mentioned that you like developers or engineers because a lot of the time the great ideas come from them, of course. How do you see also the role now of, like, more data scientists or data analysts, have different titles sometimes, right? Because I've also seen it sometimes, maybe more speaking of product teams, that there's a data scientist full-time dedicated to one team. Sometimes it's like share across different teams. How have you seen it maybe working best as well?
Well, the real issue is just how many of them do you have? Most companies would rather have more data scientists, and just like they're engineers basically, and so they are going to be a great source of innovation. So we love them. It depends on your product. Sometimes you need one on your team, full-time member on your team. Other times you've got one assigned to 3 or 4 teams, whatever it might be. But yeah, and of course there's a little difference between a data scientist and a data engineer, and then there's a bigger difference with a data analyst. But these are great roles today, especially for consumer companies.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got a question if I can.
Sure.
Yes.
Hey, so we're a startup, we're a B2C company. There's about 100 of us now. We're growing from about 10 people, and we're now expanding into multiple product teams. And so we've got a company mission that everyone's behind. We've got bets that we believe are going to get us there. But the bit that I'm struggling with is, how do we fold in product strategy so that the stakeholders across the business buy in with that sequence? So we might have 10 pieces of, we might have 10 ideas that we think are going to get us to towards our bets and our goals, but we can only work on maybe 1 or 2 of those ideas. But everyone's eager to work on more. So sometimes for example, the ops team might pick up an idea and work on it without product. So how do you get alignment with what order the product team attacks those problems?
Yeah. So you sound like you are describing a company without a product strategy.
Okay.
At all. And, placing bets is one of those terms where sometimes that if you have a product strategy, that's great. If you don't have a product strategy, then I would rather rephrase placing bets to just throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. So I just sent you a link. This is a very big topic. It's an hour topic on its own, product strategy, but it doesn't sound like you have that. And I would argue that at your size especially, you can't afford not to have a real product strategy. That should be driving which bets you choose to make. It's not about stakeholders either. They should understand the strategy and the vision. They should understand that. But this is more about how do you make sure, because you don't have that many people and you can't afford to waste your efforts. So product strategy is about, it's not about working hard, it's about working smart. And so that's what I would encourage you to do, is go through that with your head of product and say, do we have this or not?
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Cool. And I'm aware also of the time, because I know, Marty, you had something else.
I do. I only have like 1 more minute because I have to get ready for my next. I have a.
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I wanted to ask everyone if they have the book, maybe you can take a screenshot and then also just say thanks to Marty for the time and for accessing to discuss with us.
Sure.
For the ones that have it, then we can take the screenshot. Okay, I'm gonna take 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Marty, thank you very much. It was very nice to speak with you and to hear all your insights. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Okay, guys. Nice to meet everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, I'm Carlos and welcome to a new book discussion of productbooklab.com. Every month we discuss online a book about product management together with the author and other product colleagues. If you want to find the recordings from our previous discussions and also join us and participate on the upcoming ones, go to productbooklab.com. To find out how to support the book club and help us keep it running without any ads, check the links in the description.